Hello, and welcome to my live stream. I'm Rashid Abu Al-Sam, talking to you from Houston, Texas. I have a podcast. I'm a journalist with over 35 years experience, and I've just written my first memoir entitled Exile of the Heart. And here it is. I just got the first proof copies yesterday. I'm very happy with it. It's a memoir across 3 continents. So in the book, I write about my life as a journalist working in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, in the Philippines, and in Brazil. In Brazil, I wrote a regular opinion column for O Globo, the largest newspaper in Brazil, in Portuguese. And I wrote it myself in Portuguese because I learned Portuguese when I was growing up in Brazil, when I studied at the American School of Brasilia. And I wrote the column on Middle East current events. So I wrote a lot about Israel and Palestinian conflict. I wrote about Egypt. I wrote about Saudi Arabia. I wrote about the Gulf. And I wrote about Filipinos working in the Gulf. So it was very interesting. My column ran for 6 years until 2018. And I've always wanted to write a book about my life. So finally, I have this new book, Exile of the Heart, as you can see, a memoir across 3 continents. So this new book is available now for pre-order on both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can get the Kindle version now and the Nook version on Barnes & Noble. It will be released on November 28th, the day after Thanksgiving. I will also have a paperback and a hardback editions of my book available on Amazon and hopefully on Barnes & Noble also. So if you're interested in what my life was like as an Arab American growing up in Switzerland and in Brazil. My mother was American. My dad was Saudi Arabian. He was born originally in Egypt, and then he became a Saudi diplomat, where he worked representing Saudi Arabia first in Geneva, Switzerland, and then in Brasilia, Brazil. So I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1964, so I'm 61 years old now. And when I was 18 months old, we all moved to Geneva, Switzerland. I had an older sister, Jamila, who was 5 years older than me. And we lived in Geneva, Switzerland until 1975, when my father was transferred to the Brazilian embassy in Brasilia, Brazil. In Switzerland, I went to a Swiss day school, kindergarten, and then for the first grade, my parents decided to put me into the Swiss public school, which was just up the hill from our apartment in Le Lignon, which is this huge apartment complex that is, at least a kilometer long. It's really, really modernist. We lived on the 16th floor in the penthouse, and you just had to walk up the hill from our apartment building, and there was a small shopping center with 2 supermarkets, Co-op and Migros, and there were several other stores. There was a pharmacy. There was small tobacco and magazine and newspaper shop. And there was a Swiss public school, elementary school. So that's where I went for the first grade to learn to read and write in French. And then after the first grade, my parents sent me to the United Nations School, which was an international school in English. I studied there for 2 years. And then for my 4th year, I went to Collège du Le Mans, which was an American curriculum school. They also had a boarding side of the school, so there were lots of rich Iranian students who boarded at the school and studied there. And then for my 5th grade, which was our last year in Geneva, my parents decided to send me back to a Swiss public school. And then when we moved to Brazil in September 1975, I was enrolled at the American School of Brasilia along with my sister Jamila. My sister graduated obviously before me in 1977, I believe, and then she got admitted to the University of Brasilia, where she studied fine arts. I graduated from the American School of Brasilia in 1982 and applied and was admitted to Swarthmore College in the US in Pennsylvania. But before I could start studying in the US, my father insisted that I go to Saudi Arabia for 1 academic year to learn Arabic. So I did. And when I finally got to go to Swarthmore in 1983, it was a revelation. It was like, oh, I'm free to be, openly gay. And I quickly joined the Gay and Lesbian Union, where I met Michael, who's become my best friend for the rest of my life until now. He lives in Washington, D.C. and works at the Library of Congress. And then after 4 years at Swarthmore, I returned to Saudi Arabia to work at Arab News, the first English language newspaper of Saudi Arabia, which was founded in 1975. I eventually made many Filipino friends and many Filipino gay friends, and I lived in Saudi Arabia for the next 19 years. Then at the end of 2007, I was recruited to join The National, which was a new English language newspaper that they were setting up in Abu Dhabi. And I moved to Abu Dhabi at the end of 2007 with my dog Nug Nug. And there at the newspaper, I was appointed the deputy opinion editor. I had never worked on a daily newspaper with such a large staff before. We were like around 200 people. Most of the staff were Americans, Canadians, and Brits. Most of them didn't speak Arabic and had never lived in the Middle East before. So that led to some interesting editorial meetings in which these untested people would suggest certain story ideas, which were not very viable considering the situations on the ground in Abu Dhabi. And then at the end of 2008, after 1 year at the National, my father had been ill for all of 2008. He'd been in and out of hospital. And then in November, my mother finally emailed me again because I kept going back and forth to visit my parents throughout 2008. And at the end of 2008 in November, my mother said, well, your dad is back in the hospital. She sent me an email. She said, I think you should come. I don't think he has much longer to live. So I decided to resign from the National and I moved back to Brazil with my dog Nug Nug and also with my Filipino boyfriend Marvin. We arrived in Brasilia, I think, on November 28th, 2008. The next day, I went to the hospital with my mother to see my dad. He was in Agahan, a large public hospital in Brasilia, because my father had stopped paying for a private health plan. And he was in this huge room with many other patients, and he was in a coma, so I couldn't talk to him. And it was very sad to see him in that situation. And then after around 4 days, he unfortunately passed away, and we had to bury him. We had to wash his body first at the Islamic Center in Brasilia. And since this was summertime in Brazil, since they're below the equator, we finally got to the cemetery with his body at around 3 p.m. And as usual in the summer in Brasilia, there are huge downpours in the afternoon around 3 or 4 p.m. every day. And just as they were putting my father's body into his grave, it's tons of rain came down, raining very hard. And then I decided to stay in Brasilia with my mother because I hadn't lived with my parents since I had left home in 1982. So since I was 18 years old. And I lived in Brasilia for 11 more years until my mother passed away at the end of 2019. And then there was a big COVID lockdown. And in 2021, after selling my mother's house in Brasilia, I moved to Houston and bought a house here, which is this house that I'm coming to you from. And that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing a bit about my life. Again, this is my new book, Exile of the Heart, a memoir across 3 continents, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Bye-bye.